Precious arrived at the sprawling mansion of the Alex family with nothing but a small suitcase and an ambitious heart. At just 23 years old, she had spent her life moving from one menial job to another. But this job, working as a maid for the wealthy Mrs. Treasure and her husband, Mr. Alex, felt like a golden opportunity. Mrs. Treasure, a high-powered executive, barely spared Precious a glance as she handed her the house keys. "Your duties are simple," she said briskly. "Keep the house spotless, ensure meals are prepared, and don't disturb my husband." Mr. Alex, on the other hand, was warm and polite. "Welcome, Precious," he said, his deep voice echoing through the grand hallway. His smile lingered a little too long, but Precious pretended not to notice. It didn't take long for Precious to notice the tension in the household. Mrs. Treasure was always away at meetings or glued to her laptop, barely interacting with her husband. Mr. Alex, a charming man in his late 30s, often sat alone in the study or by the pool, his loneliness palpable. As Precious cleaned the house, she couldn't help but admire the life they had built. The luxury, the wealth, it was everything she had ever dreamed of. And yet, there was an emptiness here, a crack in the foundation of their marriage. "I could fit here," she thought one evening as she prepared dinner. "I could make him happy." It was a dangerous thought, but once it entered her mind, it refused to leave. It had been 2 weeks since Precious started working for the Alex family. By now, she had memorized the rhythms of the household. Mrs. Treasure left early every morning in tailored suits and didn't return until late at night, her face a mask of exhaustion. Mr. Alex, however, was a different story. He spent his mornings reading newspapers in the garden and his afternoons taking calls in his study. Precious couldn't help but notice how his gaze occasionally lingered on her as she worked. She told herself it was harmless, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. One afternoon, as she polished the wooden banister leading to the upper floor, she felt his eyes on her again. She glanced up and caught him watching from the study door. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze lingered a moment too long before he disappeared into the room. Precious smirked. "So he's noticed me?" she thought. Later that evening, as she served dinner, Mr. Alex struck up a conversation. "You've been doing an excellent job, Precious," he said, his tone warm. "The house has never looked this good." "Thank you, sir," she replied, lowering her eyes demurely. "I just want to make sure everything is perfect for you and Madam." "Madam is rarely here to notice," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. Precious hesitated. She must be very busy. Running a company is no small task. "She's always been busy," he muttered, almost to himself. That night, Precious lay awake in her small room, replaying the conversation in her mind. The vulnerability in his voice had struck a chord. It was clear he felt neglected, and she couldn't help but wonder if she could be the one to fill that void. The days turned into weeks, and Precious began to see more of Mr. Alex's vulnerabilities. He was a man craving attention, and she was more than willing to provide it. One morning, as she prepared his coffee, she noticed his tie was crooked. Without thinking, she stepped closer and adjusted it. "There," she said, her fingers brushing against his chest. "Perfect." He looked at her, startled at first, but then his lips curved into a smile. "Thank you, Precious." The moment was brief, but it planted a seed in both their minds. As the days passed, Precious found small ways to get closer to him. She lingered a little longer when serving him tea, complimented his suits, and laughed at his jokes. Mr. Alex, in turn, seemed to light up around her. One evening, as they sat in the garden, she brought him a glass of wine. "You work so hard, sir. You deserve to relax," she said softly. He chuckled. If only my wife thought the same. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable, and Precious seized the opportunity. "Maybe she just doesn't see how much you do," she said, her tone sympathetic. "Some people don't realize what they have until it's too late." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. For the first time, Mr. Alex looked at her not as a maid, but as a woman. And in that moment, Precious knew she was winning. It was a quiet evening, and the mansion was cloaked in an unusual stillness. Mrs. Treasure had called to say she wouldn't be home for dinner again. Mr. Alex sat alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the fireplace. Precious hesitated before entering the room. She had just finished tidying up the kitchen, but something drew her to him. "Sir, would you like me to bring you anything else?" she asked softly. He looked up at her, his eyes clouded with something she couldn't quite place. "No, Precious, sit with me instead." Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't think Madam would approve." "Madam isn't here," he said with a wry smile. "And besides, I could use the company." Precious sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. They talked for what felt like hours, about everything and nothing at all. He shared stories of his youth, his dreams, and his frustrations. Precious listened intently, her gaze never leaving his face. "You're easy to talk to," he said eventually. "I'm just glad I can be here for you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Before she could stop herself, she reached out and placed a hand on his arm. The gesture was simple, but the electricity between them was undeniable. "Precious," he began, but his words trailed off. She leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on his. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, their lips met in a tentative kiss. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen glances and secret meetings. Precious and Mr. Alex became masters of discretion, careful not to arouse suspicion. But behind closed doors, their passion burned fiercely. Precious was no longer just the maid. She was his confidant, his escape, and increasingly, his obsession. She reveled in the attention, basking in the warmth of his affection. One afternoon, while Mrs. Treasure was away at a business conference, Precious prepared a lavish lunch for Mr. Alex. They dined together in the garden, laughing and sharing stories as if they were the only two people in the world. "You make me feel alive again," he confessed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And you make me feel special," she replied, her eyes shimmering with emotion. Their affair grew bolder with each passing day. Precious began wearing more flattering outfits, subtly enhancing her appearance. Mr. Alex noticed every detail, showering her with compliments and small gifts. But as their relationship deepened, Precious started to want more. Being the other woman wasn't enough. She wanted to be the woman, the one who stood by his side, who shared his life, and who bore his name. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but Precious had never been one to back down from a challenge. "I'll make him mine," she vowed silently, "no matter what it takes." Mrs. Treasure arrived home late one evening to find the house unusually quiet. The dining table, once adorned with elegant meals and fresh flowers, was bare. The smell of freshly cooked food no longer lingered in the air. "Precious," she called, her voice echoing through the empty hallways. Precious appeared moments later, her face calm and unreadable. "Yes, madam? Where's dinner?" Mrs. Treasure asked, irritation creeping into her tone. "Mr. Alex said he wasn't hungry, so I didn't prepare anything special," Precious replied smoothly. Mrs. Treasure sighed, too tired to argue. "Fine, just make me something quick." As Precious disappeared into the kitchen, Mrs. Treasure noticed the subtle changes around her. The house, though clean, lacked its usual warmth. Mr. Alex barely acknowledged her when she entered the living room. Instead, he was engrossed in a book, his expression distant. "Long day?" she asked, trying to engage him. "Same as always," he replied curtly. She frowned but decided to let it go. As she ate her hastily prepared meal, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Little did she know, Precious was watching her from the shadows, a sly smile playing on her lips. Precious knew she had to solidify her place in Mr. Alex's life. The small gestures and fleeting moments they shared were no longer enough. She needed him to see her as indispensable. One afternoon, as Mr. Alex sat in his study, Precious brought him a cup of coffee. She lingered by his side, her presence comforting. "You seem stressed, sir," she said softly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's nothing." Maybe I can help, she offered, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. You already do, Precious. Their relationship grew more intimate, and Precious began to take on more responsibilities in the household. She managed the finances, planned meals, and even coordinated small gatherings. Mr. Alex relied on her more and more, while Mrs. Treasure remained oblivious, consumed by her work. One evening, as they sat in the garden, Mr. Alex opened up about his frustrations. I feel invisible in my own home, he admitted. You're not invisible to me, Precious replied, her voice dripping with sincerity. He reached for her hand, and she let him. In that moment, she knew she was winning. Mrs. Treasure's closest friend, Gloria, was the first to notice the cracks in her friend's marriage. Over coffee one Saturday, she voiced her concerns. Treasure, have you noticed how distant Alex has been lately? Gloria asked, stirring her cappuccino. Mrs. Treasure frowned. He's been quiet, yes, but it's probably just work stress. Work stress or something else? Gloria pressed, her tone pointed. What are you implying? I'm saying you should pay more attention to what's happening in your home. Precious seems awfully comfortable here, don't you think? Mrs. Treasure waved her off. Don't be ridiculous. She's just a maid. Gloria leaned forward. Treasure, sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. Just keep an eye on things. Though she brushed off Gloria's warning, the conversation planted a seed of doubt in Mrs. Treasure's mind. That evening, as she watched Mr. Alex and Precious interact during dinner, she noticed small things. The way his gaze lingered on Precious a little too long. The way Precious smiled at him with a confidence that bordered on boldness. For the first time, Mrs. Treasure felt uneasy. Precious sensed Mrs. Treasure's growing suspicion and decided to act. She couldn't afford to lose the ground she had gained. One evening, while Mrs. Treasure was out at a late meeting, Precious prepared an elaborate dinner for Mr. Alex. Candles flickered on the dining table, and the aroma of roasted chicken filled the air. This is incredible, Mr. Alex said, taking a bite of the meal. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. I wanted to, Precious replied, her voice soft and alluring. You deserve to be cared for. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Precious poured him a glass of wine. They sat close, the air between them thick with tension. You've been so good to me, he said, his voice low. I only want to make you happy, she replied, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Before they knew it, they were in each other's arms, their passion rekindled. Precious felt a surge of triumph. She had him exactly where she wanted him. But in the back of her mind, she knew Mrs. Treasure was starting to suspect. She would have to be even more careful and even more ruthless. One late night, Mrs. Treasure returned home earlier than expected. The house was dark, but faint laughter drifted from the living room. She followed the sound, her heart pounding. Peeking through the doorway, she froze. There, on the couch, were her husband and Precious, sitting far too close. Precious's hand rested on Mr. Alex's knee, and they were laughing like old friends. Mrs. Treasure felt a wave of nausea. Her worst fears were coming true. She retreated silently, her mind racing. The next morning, she confronted Mr. Alex. Is there something you need to tell me? She demanded. He looked startled. What do you mean? Don't play dumb, Alex. I saw you with Precious last night. It's not what you think, he stammered. Then what is it? She snapped. But before he could answer, Precious entered the room, her expression calm and composed. Madam, is everything all right? Mrs. Treasure's calm demeanor unnerving. I only want to help, madam. Mrs. Treasure's blood boiled. She could see it now. Precious wasn't just a maid. She was a threat. After the tense confrontation, Precious knew it was only a matter of time before Mrs. Treasure acted on her suspicions. But she wasn't afraid. If anything, she felt emboldened. That evening, while Mrs. Treasure worked late again, Precious found Mr. Alex in his study. She entered without knocking, carrying a tray of coffee and pastries. You seem tense, she said, placing the tray on the desk. He sighed heavily. Treasure thinks there's something going on between us. And what did you tell her? Precious asked, feigning innocence. I denied it, of course, he replied, running a hand through his hair. But she's not convinced. Precious stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do you regret what we've done? He looked up at her, his eyes filled with conflict. I don't know. I feel like I'm betraying her. But I can't stop thinking about you. She placed a hand on his shoulder, leaning in. Then don't stop. Life is too short to deny yourself happiness. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, and in that moment, Precious knew she had him. Mrs. Treasure wasn't one to sit idly by. After the confrontation, she decided to dig deeper. She hired a private investigator to keep an eye on Precious and her husband. I need proof, she told the investigator. If there's something going on, I want to know about it. The investigator agreed, and within days, he began sending her reports. Precious and Mr. Alex were careful, but not careful enough. The investigator captured photos of them walking too closely in the garden, sharing private smiles, and even sneaking off to the guest house together. When Mrs. Treasure saw the evidence, her heart shattered. But she didn't cry. Instead, she vowed to fight back. Precious thinks she can take my husband, she muttered, but she doesn't know who she's dealing with. Just as Mrs. Treasure began planning her next move, Precious decided to escalate things. One morning, as the family sat down for breakfast, she dropped a bombshell. Madam Sir, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I have something important to say. Mrs. Treasure looked up, her eyes narrowing. What is it? Precious hesitated, then placed a hand on her stomach. I'm pregnant. The room fell silent. Mr. Alex stared at her in shock, while Mrs. Treasure's face turned pale. Pregnant? Mrs. Treasure repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Precious said, her eyes brimming with fake tears. And it's Mr. Alex's child. Mrs. Treasure shot out of her chair, her hands trembling with rage. You lying little Treasure, calm down, Mr. Alex said, standing between them. Calm down? She's trying to destroy our family. I didn't mean for this to happen, Precious said, her voice quivering, but I can't undo what's already done. Mrs. Treasure stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Precious smirked inwardly. The game was far from over, and she was determined to win. Mrs. Treasure locked herself in the master bedroom, her heart pounding as the weight of Precious's announcement settled over her. The betrayal stung deeply, but the claim of pregnancy felt like a dagger to her soul. She couldn't sit idly by. She had to act. Meanwhile, Mr. Alex and Precious sat in the dining room, the tension thick between them. Why would you announce that like this? Mr. Alex asked, his voice low but firm. I thought it was time you knew, Precious replied, feigning innocence. Don't you think our child deserves to be acknowledged? Our child. The words felt foreign to him, but he couldn't deny the possibility. Upstairs, Mrs. Treasure was already devising a plan. She called Gloria, her most trusted friend. You were right, she said, her voice breaking. She's pregnant, or at least she claims to be. Don't let her manipulate you, Gloria replied firmly. You need to find out the truth. A paternity test will settle this once and for all. You're right, Mrs. Treasure agreed. But first I need to confront Alex. He needs to understand what's at stake. That evening, Mrs. Treasure demanded a private conversation with Mr. Alex. They sat in the study, the tension palpable. How could you let this happen? She asked, her voice trembling. It wasn't intentional, he replied, guilt written all over his face. It just happened. Just happened? She repeated, her voice rising. You've destroyed everything we built because you couldn't keep your hands off the maid. Treasure, I'm sorry, he said, reaching for her hand. Sorry won't fix this, she snapped, pulling away. Do you even know if the child is yours? He hesitated. She says it is. And you believe her? I don't know, he admitted, his voice cracking. But if there's even a chance. Mrs. Treasure took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. We're getting a paternity test. Until then, don't make any decisions. What if it is mine? He asked hesitantly. Then we'll deal with it, she said coldly. But I won't let her destroy this family without a fight. Precious wasn't blind to the storm brewing around her. She knew Mrs. Treasure would try to discredit her, but she was prepared. She began planting seeds of doubt in Mr. Alex's mind. Your wife doesn't care about you, she whispered one evening as they sat in the garden. She's only worried about her reputation. But I care about you, Alex. I love you. Her words were like poison, slowly corroding his loyalty to his wife. At the same time, Precious began showing subtle signs of pregnancy. Frequent nausea, cravings, and fatigue. She made sure Mr. Alex noticed, further convincing him of her condition. But Mrs. Treasure wasn't fooled. She kept a close eye on Precious, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The battle lines were drawn, and the war for Mr. Alex's heart and the truth had only just begun. Days passed in tense silence as both women played their parts in the household. Mr. Alex seemed torn, caught between his guilt and the allure of Precious's charm. Mrs. Treasure, however, was focused solely on the paternity test. She had arranged for one without informing anyone. She sat in the living room, her fingers nervously tapping against the armrest. She had to know the truth. The test results were supposed to arrive that afternoon, and she couldn't bear to wait much longer. Precious, sensing the change in atmosphere, kept her distance from Mr. Alex, who appeared distracted and withdrawn. She couldn't let Mrs. Treasure win. At precisely 3 p.m., Mrs. Treasure received the call. Mrs. Treasure, we've received the results of the paternity test. The child is Mr. Alex's. Treasure's heart sank. It was exactly what she feared, but it didn't break her resolve. She had already known, deep down, that Precious had been telling the truth about the pregnancy. Now it was time to take action. She hung up the phone, her mind racing. There was no going back now. That evening, after dinner, Mrs. Treasure sat her husband down. The tension in the room was thick as she placed the envelope with the paternity test results on the table. I know the truth, Alex, she said quietly, her eyes locking onto his. He stared at the envelope, guilt and fear flooding his expression. Treasure, No, she interrupted, her voice steady but cold. Don't say anything, I already know. I'm sorry, I never meant for this to happen, he said, his voice shaking. Sorry won't fix this, she replied, her tone final. I'm giving you an ultimatum. Either you choose me in this family or you go and be with her. But if you choose her, you're out. Don't expect me to keep pretending everything is fine. He stared at her, his face a mixture of regret and confusion. I don't know what to do, Treasure. Mrs. Treasure's eyes were filled with determination. You have to make a choice. Now, Precious had to be dealt with, and Mrs. Treasure knew this was the only way to regain control. The following morning, Precious stood by the window, watching as Mrs. Treasure and Mr. Alex spoke in hushed tones in the garden. Her heart raced, sensing the shift in the air. She knew the paternity test results had arrived. Now she just needed to see how Mr. Alex would respond. When he entered the house later, his face was unreadable. Precious met him at the door, her smile sweet but full of anticipation. So? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Mr. Alex hesitated, his eyes filled with inner conflict. It's true. The baby is mine. Precious's face lit up with triumph, but she quickly masked it with concern. I'm so glad, Alex. I knew we were meant to be together. He looked away, clearly struggling with his emotions. But, Precious, Treasure wants me to choose. She's given me an ultimatum. Precious's heart sank. She hadn't expected this. She had assumed that once the truth came out, Mr. Alex would leave his wife and start fresh with her. Choose? She repeated, feigning confusion. What do you mean? She's giving me a choice between her and you, he said, his voice full of frustration. I don't know what to do anymore, Precious. I never wanted this to happen. Precious stepped closer, her voice soft and coaxing. You have to choose me, Alex. I'm carrying your child. We'll have a family together. He looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. But I don't know if I can walk away from my marriage. Precious's grip on his arm tightened. You'll regret it if you don't. I need you. But in the back of her mind, Precious realized the power she had was slipping. She needed to make her move, and soon. Mrs. Treasure was not a woman to be underestimated. She knew exactly how to play her cards. After Mr. Alex's refusal to choose, Mrs. Treasure decided to take control of the situation. She confronted Precious in the hallway, her voice cold and unwavering. You've gone too far, Precious, Mrs. Treasure said, her gaze sharp. You think you can tear my family apart and get away with it? Precious stood tall, but a flicker of fear passed through her. I'm not trying to tear anything apart. I'm just doing what's best for me and my child. Your child? Mrs. Treasure scoffed. You're nothing but a homewrecker, Precious, and I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me. You think you can intimidate me? Precious shot back. You've lost, Treasure. Alex is mine now. But Mrs. Treasure wasn't backing down. We'll see about that. I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for. Precious's face tightened. You'll regret this. Perhaps. But you'll regret underestimating me, Mrs. Treasure replied, her voice cold as ice. The game was no longer about who was right. It was about survival, and both women knew they would stop at nothing to win. The days following the confrontation were tense and filled with silence. Mr. Alex spent his evenings locked in his study, wrestling with his conscience. He loved Treasure, but the connection he had with Precious was undeniable. He was torn between the life he had built with his wife and the unexpected turn his life had taken with Precious. Mrs. Treasure, on the other hand, had become more determined than ever. She threw herself into her work, using it as a distraction, but her mind was always on what was happening in her home. She couldn't allow Precious to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. One evening, as Mr. Alex returned from a long day at the office, he found Mrs. Treasure sitting in the living room, waiting for him. Alex, we need to talk, she said, her voice calm but filled with an intensity he hadn't heard in a long time. He sat down beside her, his face etched with exhaustion. What's on your mind, Treasure? I've made my decision, she said firmly. If you want to stay with me, then you need to choose me, now. No more games, no more pretending. He looked at her, the weight of his indecision heavy on his shoulders. I'm not sure I can just turn my back on Precious. She's carrying my child, Treasure. I don't care about that, she snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. What I care about is that you are my husband, and you made a vow to me. Don't forget that. His heart wavered. He had never seen her like this before, so cold and unforgiving. He was afraid that he might lose her forever. I need time, he muttered, standing up. I can't make a decision right now. But Mrs. Treasure's expression hardened. Then we're done. Precious had been watching from the sidelines, but she knew that if she didn't act quickly, she might lose everything. She needed to secure her place in Mr. Alex's life, no matter what it took. That night, she made her move. She dressed in a way that she knew would catch Mr. Alex's attention, her figure accentuated by the tight dress she wore. She made her way to his study, where he was once again alone, lost in his thoughts. Alex, she said softly, her voice low and seductive. He looked up at her, his eyes betraying his inner turmoil. Precious. I'm not sure what to do anymore. Don't think, just feel, she whispered, walking closer to him. You and I belong together. I'm carrying your child, Alex. You owe it to us to make this work. She reached out and placed a hand on his chest, her touch lingering. He didn't pull away. I'm not sure if I can leave her, he confessed, his voice barely audible. Then don't leave her. Just be with me too, she coaxed. We can make it work. I'll give you everything you need. Her words were a soft temptation, pulling him further into the web she had spun. Mrs. Treasure had been waiting for this moment. She knew that Precious would try to lure Mr. Alex back into her web, but she wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. She stood at the door of his study, watching through the small crack as Precious wrapped herself around him, her lips brushing against his ear. Mrs. Treasure's heart broke. This was the woman who had destroyed her life, the woman who had torn apart her marriage. But she wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to show weakness. With a deep breath, Mrs. Treasure entered the study. "Alex, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury. Both Precious and Mr. Alex looked up, surprised. Precious's expression faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "What's this about, Treasure?" Mr. Alex asked, his voice filled with exhaustion. "You've made your choice, haven't you?" she said coldly, looking directly at him. "You've chosen her over me." Mr. Alex stood up, but his movements were slow, hesitant. "Treasure, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she said, her voice breaking. "I've already made my decision. If you choose her, then I'm done. I'm done fighting for a man who doesn't care about me." Precious smirked, her victory almost complete. But before she could say anything, Mrs. Treasure turned to her. "You think you've won, don't you?" Mrs. Treasure said, her eyes filled with disdain. "You think you've stolen everything from me. But you haven't. You've only made me stronger." The following day, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Mrs. Treasure was preparing for a final confrontation, and Precious was on edge, sensing that things were about to take a dangerous turn. Mr. Alex, meanwhile, had made up his mind. He knew that the choice he made would determine the course of his life, and he couldn't put it off any longer. In the living room, Mrs. Treasure stood tall, her eyes cold as she addressed Mr. Alex. "I've given you a choice, and now I'm giving you one last chance to make the right one." "Treasure, Don't say it, Alex," she interrupted. "I'm done. If you want to be with her, then go. But if you want to stay with me, you need to prove it. I'm not going to wait around for you to make up your mind." Mr. Alex hesitated, his heart heavy with regret. "I don't want to lose you, Treasure." "Then choose me, Alex," she said, her voice firm. "Choose your family. Choose what we had." Precious entered the room, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes were filled with desperation. "Alex, don't listen to her. We're having a child together. You can't just walk away from that." Mrs. Treasure's gaze turned icy. "You think I'll let you destroy my family just because you're carrying his child?" she spat. "You've made a mistake, Precious, and I'll make sure you regret it." The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. It was a battle of wills. Who would come out victorious? The room seemed to hold its breath as Mr. Alex stood between the two women, each one waiting for him to make a decision. His mind raced, his heart torn between the woman he had promised to love and the one who had unexpectedly entered his life. Precious's eyes gleamed with desperation, her voice soft and pleading. "Alex, you know we belong together. You can't throw this away." Mrs. Treasure's eyes, however, were cold, her voice firm. "Don't let her manipulate you. Think about what you're throwing away. Think about the life we've built." Mr. Alex's hands trembled as he wiped his forehead. He had always prided himself on being decisive, but now, faced with the consequences of his actions, he couldn't bring himself to choose. I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice shaking. Mrs. Treasure's expression hardened. "You don't know what to do? I've stood by you through everything. I've supported you. And now, when I need you the most, you can't even choose me." Precious stepped forward, her voice softer but still full of longing. "Alex, I'm carrying your child. You can't just walk away from that." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. "I know," he whispered, "but I can't lose Treasure either. She's been my wife, my partner." Mrs. Treasure's face twisted with pain, but she didn't back down. "Then choose me. Choose our life. You've made enough mistakes, Alex. Don't make another one." The silence in the room stretched on, and for the first time, Mr. Alex felt like he was drowning. Hours passed after the confrontation, but no decision had been made. Mr. Alex retreated to his study, unable to escape the weight of his choices. Mrs. Treasure remained in the living room, pacing back and forth, her thoughts racing. Precious, too, had withdrawn to her quarters, but the bitterness in her heart burned hot. She had given Mr. Alex everything. Her love, her loyalty, and now her pregnancy. Yet it seemed that he was too torn to make the choice that she believed should have been obvious. The following morning, as Mr. Alex prepared for work, Mrs. Treasure walked into the kitchen. She wasn't going to wait any longer. "I've made my decision," she said softly, her voice calm but filled with finality. Mr. Alex turned to face her, his face a mixture of confusion and relief. "What do you mean?" "I'm leaving," she said quietly. "I can't keep living like this, constantly questioning whether you'll choose me or her." "No, Treasure, please," he begged, reaching for her hand. "Don't go. I need you." She pulled her hand away, her expression hardening. "You need to make a choice, Alex. I've already made mine. I can't stay in a marriage where I'm constantly second to someone else. You're not the man I thought you were." Mr. Alex's heart sank as he realized that she was serious. "Treasure, don't do this. I've already done it," she said, her voice trembling. "You've lost me, Alex, and I'm not coming back." With those final words, Mrs. Treasure turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing in the kitchen, completely alone. In the days that followed, the house was eerily quiet. Mrs. Treasure had packed her things and moved out, leaving Mr. Alex to face the consequences of his indecision. Precious, however, remained, and it became clear that she was waiting for him to make the next move. But Mr. Alex couldn't bring himself to face her either. He was lost, consumed by guilt and regret. Precious noticed the shift in his behavior. The passion that had once been between them now felt hollow. She tried to speak to him, to offer comfort, but he remained distant. "Alex, what's wrong?" she asked one evening, her voice tinged with frustration. "I don't know what I want anymore, Precious," he admitted, his voice strained. "I thought I could have everything, but now I realize I can't. I've lost both of you." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You think I'm going to just wait around for you to figure things out? I've sacrificed too much for this to fall apart." "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but I don't know if I can give you what you want. I've lost my wife, and now I've lost my way." Precious stood there, staring at him, the reality of the situation settling in. She had fought so hard for this, but now it seemed that she had nothing left to fight for. Mrs. Treasure had moved on, or so it seemed. She had retreated to her family's estate, away from the drama of her fractured marriage. But even in the solitude, her thoughts constantly returned to Mr. Alex and the pain he had caused her. She didn't expect him to come running back, but she did expect some sort of closure. One afternoon, as she sat in the garden, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Mr. Alex. "I've made my decision," it read. "I want to be with you. Please, let's talk." Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly composed herself. She couldn't allow herself to be vulnerable again. She had already suffered too much. She texted back. "It's too late, Alex. You made your choice when you couldn't decide. I've moved on." She sat back in her chair, the weight of her words sinking in. It was over. She had finally let go. For the first time in months, Mrs. Treasure felt a sense of peace. She had made her choice, and now she was free from the man who had betrayed her. She spent her days focusing on herself, rediscovering her passions, and rebuilding the life she had once lost. Precious, too, found herself at a crossroads. She had won Mr. Alex's heart, but at what cost? She was left with the bitter realization that winning wasn't the same as happiness. She moved away, starting fresh in a new city, away from the chaos and heartbreak of her past. As for Mr. Alex, he was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. He had chosen neither woman fully, and now he was alone, with only his regrets to keep him company. He kept calling his wife's phone non-stop, but she refused to take his calls. The days after the breakup had been filled with isolation and reflection for both Mr. Alex and Mrs. Treasure. Each had spent time apart, reevaluating their lives and their mistakes. But as the weeks passed, the weight of their separation began to take its toll. Neither of them could forget the love they once shared. Mrs. Treasure, though hurt, realized that the years they had spent together meant more than the betrayal she had suffered. She missed the life they had built, the family they had started. It wasn't easy to forgive, but she knew that holding on to bitterness would only destroy her in the end. After several attempts by Mr. Alex to reach her, he called. He texted non-stop. He even visited her place, but she refused to let him in. Then, one fateful evening, after much thought, Mrs. Treasure decided to give her marriage another chance. As she walked through the garden, she received a call from Mr. Alex. His voice was tentative, filled with regret. "Treasure, I've made a mistake. I know I can never undo what I've done, but I want to try again. I've been lost without you, and I can't keep pretending that this is what I want. I want to make things right." Her heart fluttered at his words. She had missed him, but the pain of his betrayal still lingered. "Alex, I don't know if I can just forget everything that happened, but I do know that I love you, and I don't want to lose you either. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it," he promised. After a long silence, Mrs. Treasure finally spoke. "I want to believe you, Alex, but it's going to take time. I'm willing to try, but we have to rebuild from the ground up." "I'll do whatever it takes," he said earnestly. Months passed, and both Mr. Alex and Mrs. Treasure worked hard to heal their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations, painful moments of doubt, and times when they both wondered if they could truly overcome the past. But slowly, they began to rebuild their trust. They went to counseling, openly discussed their feelings, and worked on their communication. Mr. Alex proved that he was committed to change. And Mrs. Treasure, though still cautious, started to believe that perhaps their love could survive. One day, as they sat in the park together, watching the sunset, Mrs. Treasure took his hand and smiled. "I never thought we'd be here again, but I'm glad we are." "I've learned a lot from this, Treasure," Mr. Alex said. "The most important lesson is that love isn't something you can take for granted. I was foolish, and I almost lost everything, but I won't make that mistake again." Mrs. Treasure nodded. "We both made mistakes, but we've learned from them. And now we have a chance to build something even stronger." Meanwhile, Precious had left the city, her life in disarray after everything that had happened. She had initially thought that winning Mr. Alex's affection would bring her happiness, but now she saw it for what it truly was: selfishness and deceit. As time passed, Precious found herself reflecting on the choices she had made. She had torn apart a family for her own desires, and now she was left with nothing. She had alienated herself from both Mr. Alex and Mrs. Treasure, and the guilt weighed heavily on her heart. One day, as she sat in a cafe, she received a message from a mutual acquaintance. It was about Mr. Alex and Mrs. Treasure. They had reconciled and were rebuilding their life together. The news hit Precious like a ton of bricks. She had lost them both. She closed her eyes, a deep regret filling her chest. She had let her own insecurities and selfishness drive her actions, and in the end, it had cost her everything. She realized now that true happiness didn't come from tearing others down. It came from building something meaningful and genuine. And in her quest to destroy a marriage, she had only destroyed herself. As the months passed, Mrs. Treasure and Mr. Alex grew stronger in their relationship. They had both learned valuable lessons about love, trust, and the importance of communication. Their bond was deeper than ever, and they were finally at peace. Precious, on the other hand, moved forward with her life, but she carried the lessons of her past with her. She knew she could never undo the harm she had caused, but she vowed to never let her selfish desires rule her again. She started to focus on her own growth, working on her career, and rebuilding her sense of self-worth. She had learned that happiness couldn't be found by taking something from someone else. It had to come from within. The story of Mr. Alex, Mrs. Treasure, and Precious is one of betrayal, regret, and redemption. It teaches us that love is not something to be taken for granted. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it takes time and effort to rebuild. It also reminds us that our actions have consequences. Precious thought she could win by tearing apart someone else's happiness, but in the end, she was left with nothing. True fulfillment comes not from hurting others, but from building meaningful relationships based on respect, trust, and love. Lastly, it shows that forgiveness, though difficult, is powerful. Mrs. Treasure and Mr. Alex were able to rebuild their relationship because they were both willing to put in the work and forgive each other. In doing so, they found a stronger, more genuine love. The moral of the story is simple. Never take love for granted. Always act with integrity, and remember that the choices you make today will shape your tomorrow. Hi besties, thank you so much for sticking with me till the end of this amazing story. What a roller coaster, right? Now let me ask you, have you ever found yourself in a situation like Mr. Alex and Mrs. Treasure? Has someone ever tried to come between you and your partner or threatened your relationship? If so, how did it make you feel, and how did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Let's have a heart-to-heart and learn from each other. To anyone going through a tough time in their relationship, remember this. Love is built on trust, communication, and mutual respect. If you ever face challenges, don't be afraid to confront them head-on. Fight for what you love, but also know your worth. And to those tempted to interfere in someone else's relationship, remember, what you take from others can never bring true happiness. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating tales and life lessons. I'll see you in our next video. Bye!